Charles had always believed in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. After decades of waiting, fighting public opinion, and navigating the complexities of royal life, he had finally married the woman he truly loved. Camilla was his anchor, his confidant, and the person who understood him better than anyone else in the world. Their relationship had survived scandals, criticism, and the weight of history itself. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his study, reviewing correspondence. He felt content, perhaps happier than he had been in years. The public had gradually warmed to Camilla, and their marriage had brought him a sense of peace he had never experienced during his first marriage. She was genuine, down to earth, and brought laughter into his sometimes rigid world. Camilla entered the room carrying a tray of tea, her familiar smile brightening his morning. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this space, who had earned her place through years of patience and understanding. Charles looked up from his papers and felt that familiar warmth in his chest. This was his life now, and it was good. "Darling, you've been working since dawn," she said, setting down the china cups with practiced grace. "The garden is beautiful this morning. Perhaps we could take a walk." Charles nodded, grateful for her gentle way of pulling him away from his duties. This was what he loved about her. She knew when to let him work and when to remind him to live. They had developed rituals over the years, small moments that belonged only to them. Morning tea, evening walks, quiet conversations by the fire. These were the threads that wove their life together. As they walked through the gardens, Camilla pointed out the new roses that had begun to bloom. She had a genuine love for gardening, something that connected them beyond their shared history. Charles watched her examining a particularly vibrant bloom, noting how the morning light caught the silver in her hair. She had aged gracefully, and their years together had only deepened his affection for her. "I have to travel to Scotland next week," Charles mentioned, thinking about his upcoming engagements. "The estate manager wants to discuss some improvements to the grounds." Camilla nodded, but he noticed a flicker of something in her expression. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but Charles had learned to read the small changes in her demeanor over their many years together. She seemed relieved, though she tried to hide it. "Of course, darling. You know how much I love having time to catch up with my own activities when you're away." Charles smiled, thinking nothing more of it. Camilla had always maintained her independence, even after their marriage. She had her own friends, her own interests, and he respected that about her. It was one of the things that made their relationship work. They gave each other space while maintaining their deep connection. The week passed quietly. Charles handled his royal duties with his usual dedication, met with various charitable organizations, and prepared for his trip to Scotland. Camilla seemed slightly more animated than usual, making plans to lunch with friends and mentioning a few appointments in London. Charles was pleased to see her enthusiasm for her own activities. On the morning of his departure, Camilla kissed him goodbye at the door. Her embrace lingered a moment longer than usual, and she looked into his eyes with an intensity that struck him as unusual. "Have a wonderful trip, Charles. Take care of yourself." Something in her voice made him pause. There was an emotional weight to her words that seemed disproportionate to a simple week-long absence. But the car was waiting, and his schedule was tight. He kissed her once more and left, carrying with him the image of her standing in the doorway, watching him go. The drive to Scotland was peaceful. Charles enjoyed these journeys, time to think, and observe the countryside he loved so deeply. He called Camilla from the car to let her know he had arrived safely, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He assumed she was out with friends, as she had mentioned. The estate in Scotland was magnificent, even more beautiful than he remembered. The manager, a capable man named Henderson, had prepared detailed reports about proposed improvements. They spent the afternoon walking the grounds, discussing everything from drainage systems to heritage conservation. Charles found himself genuinely excited about the plans. That evening, Charles tried calling Camilla again. Once more, her phone went to voicemail. This was unusual. She typically answered his calls or returned them quickly. A small worry began to form in his mind, but he pushed it aside. Perhaps she was simply enjoying her freedom, staying out later than usual with friends. On the second day, Charles became more concerned. He had left 3 messages and sent 2 texts, all unanswered. He called their housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, who informed him that Camilla had left early that morning and hadn't mentioned when she would return. "Did she say where she was going?" Charles asked. "No, Your Royal Highness. She just said she had important business in London and would be back later." Charles felt a strange unease settling in his stomach. In all their years together, Camilla had never been so uncommunicative during his travels. Even when she was busy or out with friends, she made time to speak with him, to share the small details of her day that kept them connected across the distance. He tried to focus on his meetings with Henderson, but found his mind wandering. The estate manager noticed his distraction and suggested they continue their discussions the following day. Charles agreed, grateful for the space to process his growing anxiety. That night, Charles sat by the window in his room, looking out at the Scottish hills. He had built his life with Camilla on trust, communication, and mutual respect. Her silence felt like a crack in the foundation of everything he believed about their relationship. He told himself he was overreacting, that there must be a simple explanation. But, deep in his heart, a cold certainty was beginning to form. Something was wrong, and, when he returned to London, nothing would ever be the same again. Charles cut his Scotland trip short by 2 days. The unease that had started as a whisper had grown into a roar he could no longer ignore. Henderson was understanding when Charles explained he needed to return to London urgently, though Charles offered no details about his personal concerns. The drive back felt endless. Charles found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for a message from Camilla that would explain her silence and restore his peace of mind. Nothing came. When he tried calling again, her phone had been switched off entirely. The housekeeper confirmed that Camilla still hadn't returned home. Arriving at Clarence's house felt different somehow. The familiar walls seemed to hold secrets, and the silence felt heavy with unspoken truths. Mrs. Patterson greeted him with obvious relief. "Sir, I'm so glad you're back. I've been quite worried. Has there been any word from my wife?" "No, sir. Nothing since Tuesday morning when she left." "It's not like her at all," Charles agreed. In all their years together, Camilla had never simply disappeared without explanation. Even during their most difficult periods, she had been reliable in her communication. This behavior was so out of character that Charles began to wonder if something had happened to her. He went to their shared study, hoping to find some clue about where she might have gone. The desk was tidy, as always, but something caught his attention. Camilla's personal laptop, which she normally took with her on any extended outing, sat closed on the side table. She had left without it, which seemed strange for someone who claimed to have important business in London. Charles hesitated for a moment before opening the laptop. He had never invaded Camilla's privacy in this way, but his worry was overriding his usual respect for boundaries. The screen lit up, asking for a password. He tried a few obvious combinations: their anniversary, her birthday, her children's names, but nothing worked. Frustrated and increasingly anxious, Charles decided to check their joint calendar. Perhaps Camilla had noted her appointments there. The calendar showed her usual commitments: charity lunches, garden society meetings, appointments with her personal assistant. But there was nothing marked for the days she had been missing. That evening, Charles called Camilla's closest friends. He spoke to Lady Thornberry, who had known Camilla for decades, and to Sarah Pemberton, with whom Camilla frequently had lunch. Both women seemed genuinely surprised to hear that Camilla was missing. "She canceled our lunch on Wednesday," Lady Thornberry said. "Said something urgent had come up. I assumed it was royal business. She seemed a bit distracted the last time I saw her," Sarah added. "But she didn't mention any travel plans or important appointments." Charles thanked them and hung up, feeling more confused than ever. If Camilla wasn't with her friends and hadn't shared her plans with anyone, where could she be? And why was she avoiding his calls? Unable to sleep, Charles wandered through the house. He found himself in Camilla's dressing room, surrounded by her familiar belongings. Her favorite perfume sat on the vanity, and several of her everyday pieces of jewelry were still in their usual places. Whatever urgent business had called her away, she hadn't packed as if she planned to be gone long. As he was turning to leave, Charles noticed that one of Camilla's jewelry boxes was slightly askew. It was unlike her to leave things untidy. Curious, he straightened it, and noticed a piece of paper that had been tucked underneath. It was a business card for a private investigation firm in London. Charles stared at the card, his mind racing. Why would Camilla need a private investigator? The card was well worn, as if it had been handled frequently. There was a phone number written in pencil on the back in Camilla's distinctive handwriting. Sleep became impossible. Charles paced his study until dawn, turning the business card over and over in his hands. Every innocent explanation he could think of seemed forced and unlikely. Camilla was a straightforward person who dealt with problems directly. If she had needed to hire an investigator for some legitimate reason, why wouldn't she have discussed it with him? The next morning, Charles made a decision that felt both necessary and like a betrayal. He called the number on the business card. Meridian Investigations, a crisp voice answered. This is regarding Camilla Parker Bowles. I believe she may be a client of yours. There was a pause. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't discuss our clients over the phone. If you'd like to make an appointment. This is her husband. She's been missing for 3 days, and I found your card among her belongings. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Perhaps you could come in this afternoon? We're located in Mayfair. Charles agreed to the meeting, though part of him wanted to hang up and pretend he had never found the card. Whatever Camilla was involved in, whatever had driven her to hire private investigators, he was about to learn truths that might change everything between them. The offices of Meridian Investigations were discreet and professional, located in an elegant Georgian building that gave no hint of the secrets it contained. Charles was shown into a small conference room where a middle-aged woman named Victoria Hartwell waited for him. Your Royal Highness, she said, standing as he entered. I must say, this is an unusual situation. Charles took a seat across from her, noting how she seemed to be weighing her words carefully. My wife has been your client. For approximately 6 months, yes. She came to us with concerns about irregularities in her past that she felt needed to be investigated. What kind of irregularities? Victoria hesitated. Sir, your wife specifically requested that these matters remain confidential. However, given her current absence and your obvious concern, I feel obligated to share what I can. Charles nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. Please. Mrs. Parker Bowles was concerned about some financial discrepancies she had discovered. Money that had been moved through various accounts, transactions that she couldn't explain or remember authorizing. She feared that someone might be using her identity for fraudulent purposes. Relief flooded through Charles. Financial fraud was serious, but it wasn't the personal betrayal he had been imagining. And what did you discover? Victoria's expression grew more somber. That's where things became complicated, sir. The transactions weren't fraudulent in the traditional sense. They were legitimate transfers, made with proper authorization. But they were connected to activities that your wife had apparently forgotten or chosen not to remember. I don't understand. Sir, the investigation led us to discover that your wife has been leading what can only be described as a double life. The money trail led us to property rentals, private meetings, and relationships that she had never disclosed to you. Charles felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. What kind of relationships? I think, Victoria said gently, it would be better if you spoke to your wife directly about these matters. What I can tell you is that she received our final report 3 days ago. The timing of her disappearance suggests that she's processing some difficult truths about herself. Charles left the investigator's office in a daze. The Camilla he thought he knew, honest, straightforward, devoted, was apparently a carefully constructed facade. She had been living some other life parallel to their marriage, conducting business and relationships that she had hidden from him completely. The drive home felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but Charles felt as if he was seeing his world through different eyes. How could he have been so blind? How could the woman who shared his bed, his meals, his most intimate thoughts, have been deceiving him so completely? When he arrived at Clarence's house, Mrs. Patterson met him at the door with obvious relief. Sir, she's back. Mrs. Parker Bowles returned about an hour ago. She's in her sitting room. Charles stood in the hallway, knowing that once he walked through that door, his life would never be the same. Everything he had believed about his marriage, about Camilla, about himself, was about to change forever. Charles stood outside Camilla's sitting room for several minutes, gathering the courage to face whatever truth awaited him inside. His hand rested on the door handle, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it. Through the thin wood, he could hear movement, the soft sound of papers rustling, a drawer being opened and closed. She was destroying evidence, he realized with a sick certainty. When he finally entered, Camilla looked up from where she sat at her writing desk. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had slept as poorly as he had. But what struck him most was the expression in her eyes. Not surprise at seeing him, but resignation, as if she had been expecting this moment. Charles, she said quietly, you came back early. You've been gone for 3 days without a word. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. I was worried something had happened to you. Camilla set down the papers she had been handling and turned to face him fully. There was a defeated quality to her posture that he had never seen before. I needed time to think. About what? About the report from Meridian Investigations. The color drained completely from Camilla's face. For a moment, she looked as if she might deny everything. But then, her shoulders sagged. You found Victoria's card. I found more than that. I spoke with her this afternoon. Charles moved further into the room, but didn't sit down. The distance between them felt immense. She told me about the financial irregularities, about the double life. Camilla closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, there were tears threatening to spill over. Charles, I never meant for you to find out this way. Find out what exactly? Because right now, I don't even know what questions to ask. For a long moment, Camilla just stared at him, seeming to weigh her options. Then, she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden they had walked through together just days before. Do you remember when we first got back together? After Diana died, and we could finally be open about our relationship. Charles nodded, though he wasn't sure where this was leading. You were so patient with me, so understanding about my need to maintain some independence, some parts of my life that were just mine. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I suppose that independence became something darker than either of us realized. Camilla, just tell me the truth. She turned back to him, and the tears she had been holding back finally began to fall. I've been gambling, Charles. Seriously gambling. Not just the occasional flutter on the horses that you know about. I've been involved with high-stakes private games, underground casinos, people who aren't the sort we usually associate with. Charles felt a strange mixture of relief and shock. Gambling was serious, especially at the level she seemed to be describing, but it wasn't the affair or criminal activity he had begun to fear. How long has this been going on? Years. It started small, just after we married. I felt so much pressure to live up to expectations, to be worthy of you and the position. The gambling gave me a sense of control, of excitement that balanced out all the protocol and duty. She sat back down, her hands shaking. But it got bigger. The stakes got higher. And I started losing more than I could afford. The money transfers Victoria discovered. I've been liquidating assets to cover my debts. Jewelry, investments that I thought you wouldn't notice. But it wasn't enough. Camilla's voice broke completely now. Charles, I owe money to people who aren't patient about repayment. Dangerous people. The full weight of the situation hit Charles like a physical blow. It wasn't just that Camilla had been gambling. She had been involved with criminals, had put herself, and potentially him at risk, and had been lying about it for years. How much money are we talking about? Almost £2 million. Charles sank into a chair, overwhelmed. £2 million was a substantial sum even for them. But more concerning was the web of deception that Camilla had built around this addiction. Who else knows about this? The people I owe money to. Victoria and her team. And now you. Camilla wiped her eyes with a tissue. I hired Victoria because I was hoping she could help me understand how things had gotten so out of hand. I thought maybe if I could trace all the money, find a pattern, I could figure out a way to fix it quietly. But the investigation revealed more than just the gambling. Camilla's fresh tears told him he was right. Charles, when you're involved in underground gambling at that level, you meet all sorts of people. You form connections that aren't healthy or appropriate. What kind of connections? There's a man named Marcus Blackwood. He runs some of the high-stakes games I've been participating in. Over time, our relationship became more than just player and host. She couldn't meet his eyes. It wasn't romantic, exactly, but it was intense. Dangerous. He has a way of making you feel alive that's almost addictive itself. Charles felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. Are you saying you had an affair? Not in the traditional sense. But I developed a dependency on him, on the excitement he represented. I would meet him for lunch, for conversations about strategy and risk. He understood the part of me that craved danger in a way that... She stopped herself. In a way that I don't. Charles, you are steady and reliable and good. You represent safety and honor and everything I should want. But Marcus represented chaos and risk and the thrill of potentially losing everything. It was like a drug. The betrayal felt complete now. Not only had Camilla been gambling away their money and lying about it, but she had formed an emotional and psychological bond with another man, someone who represented everything that Charles was not. Is this why you disappeared for 3 days? You were with him? No. Camilla's voice was firm. I was in a hotel room, reading Victoria's report and trying to figure out how to tell you the truth. The report detailed everything, the money, the meetings with Marcus, the full scope of what I'd become involved in. I realized that I had built a life based on lies and addiction, and I didn't know how to face you. But you did face me. You came back. Because Marcus called me yesterday. He knows about the investigation. Apparently, he has contacts everywhere. He told me that my debts are now his leverage over me, and over you by extension. He wants me to use my position to help him with some business dealings. If I don't cooperate, he'll expose everything publicly. Charles felt the world shifting around him again. This wasn't just about gambling addiction or even emotional infidelity. This was blackmail, and it involved his position as heir to the throne. What kind of business dealings? Import licenses for some questionable art and antiquities. He wants me to use my connections to expedite paperwork and avoid certain inspections. Camilla looked directly at him now. Charles, he's essentially asking me to help him smuggle stolen artifacts. And if I refuse, he'll destroy both our reputations. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles understood now that they weren't just dealing with personal betrayal or financial problems. They were facing potential criminal involvement, blackmail, and public scandal that could damage the monarchy itself. How did we get here, Camilla? How did we go from morning tea and garden walks to this? I don't know, she whispered. I thought I could handle it all privately. I thought I could protect you from the uglier parts of who I am. But now we're both trapped. Camilla nodded, her face a mask of despair. Charles, I am so sorry. For all of it. For the lying, for the gambling, for getting involved with Marcus, for putting you at risk. I never meant for any of this to touch you. Charles looked at his wife, the woman he had loved for decades, fought for, and built a life with, and realized that he didn't really know her at all. The Camilla sitting before him was a stranger, someone capable of deception and risk-taking that was completely foreign to everything he thought he understood about her character. What happens now, he asked. I don't know. Marcus is expecting an answer from me tomorrow about whether I'll cooperate with his smuggling operation. If I say no, he'll go public with everything. If I say yes, we become criminals. Charles stood up slowly, feeling every one of his years. I need time to process all of this. Of course, Charles, I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any possibility of forgiveness? Any chance that we can find a way through this together? Charles looked at her for a long moment, seeing both the woman he had loved and the stranger who had betrayed him. I don't know, Camilla. Right now, I don't know anything anymore. He left her sitting in the room surrounded by the evidence of her deception and walked out into the garden where they had been so happy just a week ago. Everything looked the same, but Charles knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Charles spent the night walking through the gardens of Clarence's house, his mind racing through decades of memories that now felt tainted with deception. Every shared moment, every intimate conversation, every decision they had made together was now colored by the knowledge that Camilla had been living a secret life the entire time. As dawn broke, he found himself sitting on the bench where they had often shared their morning coffee. The irony wasn't lost on him. This had been their sanctuary, the place where they talked about their hopes and fears. Now it felt like a stage where elaborate performances had been conducted for his benefit. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your wife has 12 hours to decide. After that, the story goes public. Marcus Blackwood doesn't make idle threats. Charles stared at the message, realizing that time was running out for all of them. In a few hours, their private crisis could become a public catastrophe that would damage not just their marriage, but the monarchy itself. He needed help, but who could he trust with something this explosive? When he returned to the house, he found Camilla in the kitchen, mechanically making tea with trembling hands. She looked as if she hadn't slept at all, and there was a desperate quality to her movements that suggested she was barely holding herself together. I received a text from your friend Marcus, Charles said, showing her the message. Camilla read it and closed her eyes. He's not bluffing, Charles. I've seen what happens to people who cross him. He has connections everywhere. Newspapers, law enforcement, even within palace security. Then, we need to think strategically about this. Charles poured himself tea, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. What exactly does he want you to do? He wants me to make a phone call to Sir Geoffrey Pemberton at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport. Geoffrey and I serve together on the Heritage Protection Board. Marcus wants me to ask Geoffrey to expedite import licenses for a collection of Byzantine artifacts that Marcus claims to have purchased legitimately from a private collector. Charles knew Sir Geoffrey well. He was an honorable man who had served the crown faithfully for decades. And these artifacts aren't legitimate? According to Victoria's investigation, they're suspected of being looted from archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq. If they're imported successfully, Marcus will sell them to private collectors for enormous profits. The implications were staggering. Not only would Camilla be helping to smuggle stolen cultural treasures, but she would be corrupting a government official and potentially destroying an innocent man's career in the process. There has to be another way, Charles said. What if we went to the authorities ourselves? Told them about the blackmail. With what proof? Marcus has been careful. All our meetings were in private settings. The gambling debts are real, but they're not technically illegal. And if we accuse him of blackmail, he'll simply release everything he has on me as retaliation. Charles sat across from her, studying her face. Even now, in the midst of this crisis, he found himself wondering how much of her distress was genuine and how much was performance. The woman he had trusted completely had revealed herself capable of deception on a scale he couldn't have imagined. Tell me about your relationship with Marcus Blackwood. The truth this time. Camilla flinched at his tone, but met his eyes. I met him about 18 months ago at a private gambling club in Mayfair. He was charming, intelligent, and completely unlike the other people in our social circle. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. Were you sleeping with him? No. But, Charles, I won't lie to you anymore. There was a connection. He understood the part of me that craved excitement, that felt suffocated by protocol and duty. With him, I could be someone other than the Duchess of Cornwall. You could be a criminal, you mean. I could be reckless. I could take risks. I could feel my heart racing with something other than anxiety about whether I was living up to royal expectations. Charles understood, perhaps better than she realized. He had spent his entire life constrained by duty and protocol, always aware that his personal desires were secondary to his obligations to the crown. But he had never responded to that pressure by seeking out dangerous relationships and illegal activities. What changed? Why did you hire the investigator? Because Marcus started pushing for more than just my participation in gambling games. He began asking questions about royal security, about your schedule, about access to certain government officials. I realized that my gambling debts had made me vulnerable to someone who wanted to use my position for his own purposes. So you hired Victoria to investigate him? I hired Victoria to investigate myself. I wanted to understand how I had gotten so deeply involved with someone like Marcus, and what the full scope of my exposure might be. Camilla's voice broke slightly. I never intended for the investigation to reveal so much about my own behavior. I thought I was being discreet. £2 million in gambling debts is hardly discreet. Charles, I know how this sounds, but I never meant to lose that much money. Each loss felt like it could be recovered with the next win. Each game felt like an opportunity to solve all my problems at once. Charles had heard enough stories about gambling addiction to recognize the pattern, but knowing the psychology behind Camilla's behavior didn't make the betrayal any easier to accept. We need professional help with this situation, he said finally. I'm going to call Sir Richard Pembroke. Sir Richard was Charles's private secretary and one of the few people he trusted completely with sensitive matters. If anyone could help them navigate this crisis without destroying everything they had built together, it was Richard. Charles, if you involve Richard, this becomes official palace business. There will be records, investigations, protocols. And if we don't involve Richard, we either become criminals or watch our reputations get destroyed in the tabloids. Those seem to be our only options now. Camilla nodded reluctantly, understanding that they had moved beyond the point where this could be handled privately. Charles made the call from his study, speaking in coded language that Richard would understand indicated extreme urgency. Within an hour, Richard arrived at Clarence's house with the discretion and efficiency that had made him invaluable to Charles over the years. After Charles explained the situation, Richard sat quietly for several minutes, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke. Your Royal Highness, this is indeed a serious situation, but it's not unprecedented. We have dealt with blackmail attempts before, though perhaps not involving someone so close to you. What are our options? Several, though none of them are pleasant. We could cooperate with law enforcement to build a case against Blackwood, but that would likely require the Duchess to make herself available as a witness, which would involve considerable public exposure. Charles looked at Camilla, who had grown even paler. What else? We could pay Blackwood's demands privately, though that sets a dangerous precedent and doesn't guarantee his silence in the future. Or we could call his bluff, allow him to release whatever information he has, and manage the public relations crisis as it develops. The room fell silent as they contemplated their choices. Each option involved significant risk and potential damage to the monarchy. Charles realized that no matter what they decided, their marriage and their public life would never be the same. There's one more option, Richard said carefully. We could arrange for the Duchess to cooperate with Blackwood's initial request, but do so under controlled circumstances that would allow law enforcement to gather evidence against him. You mean set him up? I mean give law enforcement the opportunity to observe criminal behavior firsthand. If the Duchess were to make the phone call to Sir Geoffrey while authorities were listening, and If Sir Geoffrey were prepared to play along, we might be able to trap Blackwood in an attempted corruption scheme. Charles looked at Camilla, who was staring at Richard with something approaching hope for the first time in days. It would be dangerous, Richard continued. Blackwood isn't a fool, and if he suspects a trap, the consequences could be severe. But it might be our only chance to neutralize the threat he represents while minimizing damage to the crown. How long do we have to decide? Based on Blackwood's ultimatum, perhaps 6 hours. Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where his world had begun to unravel just days before. Everything he had believed about his life, his marriage, and his future was now in question. But perhaps, with careful planning and considerable risk, they might be able to salvage something from this catastrophe. Richard, make the necessary calls. We're going to fight back. The operation was set in motion with military precision. Within 3 hours, Sir Richard had coordinated with counterintelligence services, briefed Sir Geoffrey Pemberton on his role in the sting operation, and arranged for sophisticated surveillance equipment to be installed in Camilla's sitting room. The authorities were particularly interested in Marcus Blackwood, as it turned out he had been on their radar for some time in connection with international art trafficking networks. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison arrived at Clarence House with a small technical team, all of whom had been vetted at the highest levels of security clearance. She was a composed woman in her 40s who spoke to Charles and Camilla with the kind of professional detachment that somehow made the surreal situation feel manageable. Your Royal Highness, Your Grace, she addressed them formally. I want you to understand that what we're attempting today carries significant risks. Mr. Blackwood has demonstrated sophisticated awareness of surveillance techniques in the past. If he suspects a trap, he may simply disappear, taking his evidence with him and leaving you exposed. Charles nodded, but Camilla looked terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if he realizes what we're doing? Then, we'll adapt, DCI Morrison replied calmly. But the alternative, allowing him to continue blackmailing you indefinitely, is ultimately more dangerous for everyone involved. The plan was relatively simple in concept, but complex in execution. Camilla would call Marcus to agree to his demands, then immediately call Sir Geoffrey to make the request about the artifact import licenses. Unknown to Marcus, Sir Geoffrey would be recording the conversation and would respond in a way designed to elicit as much incriminating information as possible from future communications. Meanwhile, authorities would be monitoring all communications and preparing to move against Marcus's entire operation. If everything went according to plan, they would have enough evidence to arrest him and his associates within a matter of days. The key, DCI Morrison explained to Camilla, is to behave as naturally as possible. Blackwood knows you well, so any deviation from your normal speech patterns or emotional responses could alert him that something has changed. As the afternoon wore on, Charles found himself watching Camilla with new eyes. Even in the midst of this crisis, even knowing everything she had hidden from him, he could see the woman he had fallen in love with decades ago. She was frightened but determined, ashamed but brave enough to face the consequences of her actions. Charles, she said quietly during a brief break while the technical team adjusted their equipment, I know that nothing I can say will undo the damage I've done to our marriage. But I want you to know that every moment of happiness we've shared was real for me. The gambling, the lies, even the connection with Marcus. Those were about my own weaknesses, not about any lack of love for you. Charles studied her face, trying to determine if this was just another performance or a moment of genuine honesty. I believe you, he said finally. But belief and forgiveness are two different things. I don't know if I can get past this, Camilla. I understand, she whispered. I just needed you to know. At precisely 4 o'clock, Camilla made the first call. The room was silent except for the software of recording equipment as her phone connected to Marcus Blackwood's number. Marcus? It's Camilla. I was beginning to wonder if you would call. His voice, coming through the speakerphone, was smooth and confident. Charles could hear the charismatic quality that had attracted his wife to this dangerous man. I've decided to cooperate with your request, Camilla said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I thought you would. You're too intelligent to sacrifice everything for the sake of misplaced principles. When will you make the call to Pemberton? Immediately after we hang up. Excellent. And Camilla, I trust you understand that this is just the beginning of our new arrangement. Your position provides access to many opportunities that could be mutually beneficial. Charles felt his jaw clench as he listened to Blackwood calmly discussing the future exploitation of his wife's royal status. I understand, Camilla replied. Good. Call me after you've spoken with Pemberton. I want details about his response and any questions he might ask. The call ended, and Camilla immediately dialed Sir Geoffrey's direct line. The conversation that followed was masterfully orchestrated. Sir Geoffrey expressed just enough surprise and reluctance to seem realistic, asked the right questions to elicit detailed responses about the artifacts in question, and ultimately agreed to expedite the licenses with convincing reluctance. You understand, Camilla, that this is highly irregular, Sir Geoffrey said during the recorded conversation. I would need detailed provenance documentation and assurance that all proper procedures have been followed. Of course, Geoffrey, I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. The collector is quite legitimate, and all the paperwork should be in order. Very well. I'll review the applications personally and see what can be done to speed the process. After she hung up, Camilla slumped in her chair, emotionally exhausted by the performance. DCI Morrison nodded with satisfaction. That went very well. Now we wait for Blackwood to take the next step. The wait wasn't long. Within 20 minutes, Marcus called back, eager to hear about the conversation with Sir Geoffrey. Camilla provided the details he wanted, and he responded with information about the artifacts that would prove crucial to building the case against him. The pieces are currently in a warehouse in Dover, he told her. I'll arrange for the paperwork to be submitted tomorrow morning. Once Pemberton approves the licenses, we can move forward with the import and sale. Marcus, Camilla said, following a script DCI Morrison had prepared. I need to understand what other opportunities you mentioned earlier. If I'm going to help you with this, I need to know what I'm getting myself into. Smart question. There are several collectors in Asia who are very interested in acquiring certain pieces from British museum collections. Pieces that rarely see public display and wouldn't be immediately missed. With your connections to the heritage boards and museum trustees, you could provide invaluable information about security procedures, storage locations, and exhibition schedules. Charles felt sick as he listened to Blackwood calmly discussing plans to rob British museums using Camilla's position and knowledge. I see, Camilla managed to say. Don't worry, darling. These arrangements are quite lucrative for everyone involved. You'll find that your gambling debts become much more manageable when you have proper income streams to support your hobby. After the call ended, DCI Morrison and her team began packing their equipment with obvious satisfaction. We have more than enough to move forward, she told Charles and Camilla. The conversation about museum thefts is particularly damaging to his case. What happens now? Charles asked. We'll monitor his communications for the next 24 hours to see if he contacts other members of his network. Then, we'll move to arrest him and any associates we can identify. With the evidence we've gathered today, plus what my team already had on file, he'll be facing serious charges for blackmail, conspiracy to traffic stolen artifacts, and attempted corruption of government officials. And the public exposure? Will any of this become public? That will largely depend on Mr. Blackwood's legal strategy. If he pleads guilty and cooperates with our investigation of the broader trafficking network, it's possible the royal connection could be kept out of the public record. If he fights the charges and tries to use his relationship with the Duchess as leverage, things could become more complicated. After DCI Morrison and her team left, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone in the sitting room where their marriage had effectively ended just hours before. The silence between them was heavy with unresolved pain and uncertainty. What happens to us now? Camilla asked quietly. Charles looked at his wife, the woman who had betrayed him so completely, but who had also just risked everything to help bring down the man who had been blackmailing them. I don't know, he said honestly. This isn't something we can simply move past as if nothing happened. I know, but, Charles, is there any possibility that we might find a way to rebuild something from this? Something honest this time. Charles considered her question for a long moment. The woman sitting across from him was capable of both devastating deception and remarkable courage. She had nearly destroyed their lives with her secrets, but she had also been willing to face the consequences when the moment came. I think, he said carefully, that will depend on whether the woman who took those risks today is who you really are, or whether she's just another performance. Camilla nodded, understanding that their future would be determined not by grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but by the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust one honest moment at a time. 6 months later, Marcus Blackwood was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 12 years in prison. His trafficking network was dismantled, and several stolen artifacts were returned to their countries of origin. The royal family's involvement in his capture was never made public. Charles and Camilla began couples therapy, working slowly to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. It was painful work, requiring both of them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their marriage. But, gradually, they began to rediscover the genuine connection that had brought them together in the first place. Camilla entered treatment for her gambling addiction and began working with a financial advisor to repair the damage her debts had caused. She resigned from several public positions while she focused on her recovery, but eventually returned to public life with a deeper understanding of her own vulnerabilities and strengths. Their marriage survived, but it was forever changed. The easy trust and comfortable assumptions of their early years together were gone, replaced by something more deliberate and conscious. They learned to love each other not despite their flaws and capacity for deception, but with full knowledge of what they were both capable of. And sometimes, when they walked together in their garden in the early morning light, Charles could see glimpses of the future they might still build together, one honest conversation at a time.